one of the privileges of attending church here is to have such a skilled worship team. I see the brothers together, and they've been singing that way since they were little kids. Their mother was a pianist who loved the Lord with all her heart, and the whole family, including Marilyn, would gather around and they would sing hymns. I think over and went on sessions as just a customary thing in the La Follette household, and now in their older age, they're still doing it. I know Sherry from the very beginning of her Christian conversion. We were in a very singing church when we came to know the Lord, and she's been singing praises to the Lord. It's wonderful to have Paul, who keeps the rhythm and the beat. There was some fear and trepidation whether this church would be ready for a drummer, and it turns out it was long overdue. There's no smoke, there's no mirrors and stuff like that, and it's just next week. Okay, we're changing up, and isn't that lovely? Isn't that a great emphasis to have a lit cross behind us? Certainly, my caution in having center stage is never to get in the way of the cross. I'm just employing the thing that God has asked me to do in teaching God's word, but it's never about the preacher, never certainly about this preacher. It's always the centrality of the cross of Christ, and I love the symbolism, and I love the lit cross behind it. Randy was saying, well, not sure whether we should do that. Let's take a vote. Everybody that thinks that should stay, there you go. There you are, Randy. You got your motion and your second. And then Carol, whose heart comes out in the song selection that she thinks up ahead of time and works finalizing here when we get to church. It's a sermon in the worship. Already I'm deeply touched and moved about the faithfulness of the Lord, no matter what our circumstances are. Whether it was Marilyn who suggested we sing that or not, it's so appropriate. She is going through days of tremendous uncertainty, not knowing the future, but she is a deeply mature believer, and those lyrics I know apply to her, and that her hope rests in the Lord and not on any outcome that she's demanding the Lord do. The elders of the church came and went to Bob's bedside at the request of the family, and we anointed him with oil. And we were full of faith. The text says that it's an effectual prayer. The prayer of righteous men can avail much. And humbly we went, and some of us have been involved in that many, many times. And it was a thrill to seek the Lord and his outcome. And we anointing him with Bob meant that we were setting him apart for the Lord to do whatever his will. But Carol, I just deeply appreciate. She's going to be out there kind of getting the luncheon ready, but to have that motif and that theme that the goodness of the Lord is with us all the time. It fits in. We don't coordinate our worship set with the sermon. Maybe a few times there's a closing song we talk about together, but it's just a wonderful intro to talk about a story. And I'm convinced I am the main principal person in this story. Zacchaeus really was a insignificant man in the town of Jericho. Jericho was infamous, particularly biblically speaking. It's not a town that should require any attention on the part of the Lord, but he gave attention in the Old Testament to a woman in Jericho, and he does in the New Testament pay attention to a man, Zacchaeus, in the New. Both of them have in common a totally unexpected movement of the Lord in the life of a person that would have been the last person in Jericho in their respective times that should have received favorable attention on the part of God. Both of them deserved to be scolded, to be shamed, to be ostracized, and then when God shows up on the scene, they ought to have been punished. And that was the prevailing opinion in both those instances, but we have the New Testament account of Zacchaeus. And as I overlook my life and grew up inauspiciously, and not to make it promote it as worse than it was, but we were very happy. But we are on the outskirts of San Diego, very near the downtown area. The next off-ramp, even still, if you go on Harbor Drive, would be downtown San Diego. And before it is a train depot where they repair trains, and there's a junkyard. There was a car junkyard, and then there was our home. And then on the right side of the alley where we live was another junkyard full of material, not cars, but just all sorts of metal and things like that. And that little street and that little house, I'm convinced that God's eye was upon me even as a little tiny boy. And much like the story of Zacchaeus, we know him because of a storybook song. Let's see it, which I thought I'd know. But I know one of the lines is, Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he. And his stature, he's small, he's hated, and one day God comes to town, and he has something to say to Zacchaeus, but not what they thought God would say to him. Here's a children's version of the story of Zacchaeus.
God's story, Zacchaeus. So part of God's story is about Zacchaeus, and it begins like this. Once there was a man named Zacchaeus, let's call him Zach, who lived in a town called Jericho. He was short, and he didn't have many friends. In fact, most people hated Zach. That's because he worked as a tax collector. See, back then people paid taxes just like now. But instead of sending money to the government, there were men in every city whose job was taking tax money from people. Problem is, those men usually lied. Zach, like most, took a lot of extra money from a lot of people, and all those people hated him. Anyway, one day Jesus came to Zach's town, and Zach wanted to see him, but so did everybody else. And remember how Zach was really short? Well, he couldn't see Jesus over everybody else's head. So guess what he did? He actually climbed up into a tree to look out over everybody. Now, imagine a grown man climbing up in a tree in the middle of a crowd. People probably thought he was crazy or weird. But Zach was willing to look weird if it meant getting closer to Jesus. From up in the tree, Zach watched as Jesus walked up. Jesus said, "Zacchaeus, hurry down. Today is my day to be a guest in your home." This was kind of like a famous person inviting themselves over, except way better. This invitation would change Zach's life. Zach scrambled down the tree to take Jesus to his house. Maybe he thought Jesus didn't know about all the money he had taken or how everybody hated him. But Jesus did know, and he loved Zach anyways. Other people saw this and they were mad. They said, "Jesus has gone into the house of a sinner." They wondered how Jesus could love somebody who had lied and stole their money. The great thing is, Jesus loves all of us, even after we've done things we deserve to get in trouble for, or even after we actually get in trouble. When we see that Jesus loves us anyway, it makes us want to show that kind of love to others. At least that's what happened to Zach. Right away, he wanted to make things right with the people he had hurt. He knew that just saying "I'm sorry" wasn't enough. So he told Jesus, "I'm going to give half of what I have to the poor, and anyone I cheated, I will pay back 4 times the amount of money I took." When Jesus saw that Zach was willing to accept his love and turn around and show it to others, he said, "My friend, today God has rescued you." And even though Zach had been a liar and a thief who was hated by everyone, he became a friend of Jesus and a part of God's family that very day. And that's the story of Zacchaeus. So, in case you missed it, here's the quick version. Zach was short. He was a tax collector. He stole money. People hated him. Jesus came to town. Zach couldn't see him. He climbed a tree. Jesus told him to come down. Jesus went to his house. Jesus loved Zach. Others were mad. Zach made things right. He became a part of God's family. And that's a part of God's story.
That's great when God's word gets applauded, or maybe it's the entertainment value of that little summation. Here's an Old Testament account of what God promised would happen someday. This is written from the perspective of the Old Covenant, the Old Testament. And the thing about the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, it was precisely to deliver the message that you're in a lot of trouble. Spiritually before God, He requires that you have a perfect righteousness like His. And then God wrote out the righteousness of God, of what it would look like when His Son came into the world and actually lived a human life of perfection. But people thought they could do it. They thought, that doesn't look so hard. I think I can be perfect. And what crept in there is that God would at least give me an A for effort. And so people then just instinctively began to compare, that at least they were better than this other person. And when God came to evaluate, it wasn't on an absolute scale that you either pass or fail. It was on this idea that people have gradations of righteousness, and I think I'm doing pretty good compared to everybody else. But the standard was God's perfection, and as it got embodied, it was the perfection of Jesus Christ. So the Old Testament, its just main message is to drive home that the righteousness to be in the presence of God is not humanly achievable, except there'll come a day when someone who is human is able to fulfill the law, the requirements of the Old Testament. He's not coming to abolish them. He's coming to fulfill them. And then He does a very wondrous, surprising thing. With His righteousness, He gives it away to those who want it. Here's an excerpt from Isaiah 59, and then the conclusion of good news. 59 is all bad news. 60 talks about the New Testament, the New Covenant. Isaiah 59 says, "Behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened that it cannot save, or His ear dull that it cannot hear. But your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God, and your sins have hidden His face from you so that He does not hear." That's the bad news, is that God's hand is not so shortened that it cannot save you, or His ear not attentive to your pleas to be forgiven, to have life purpose, to have a relationship with Him. But our sin, our iniquities, have cut us off from God because God doesn't hear us. He doesn't respond to us because we could not possibly live a life to the standard that He desires in order to get a hearing with Him. It's just not able to be done. Even now, you need credentials to stand. Do you have an appointment, sir? Before important people. Does He expect you? And so we've all maybe had that desire to be close to somebody, but just not able to get an audience. I've told this story more than a few times. I had an audience one time with Robert Kennedy, where Robert Kennedy was this close to my face. But I was a fan and a mobbing teenager than I was a friend, and so we never talked because I didn't have the credentials. I had close access, but it went for naught except for a thrill for a young man like myself who thought that Robert Kennedy could change not only my life, but the life of the entire country when I was in 8th grade. You need both proximity and you need the credentials to be in the presence of God. Here's the promise. Arise, chapter 60, shine, for your light has come. There's a light that's going to come into the world. And the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. You'll behold His glory. Glory is the only begotten, full of grace and truth. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and His glory will be seen upon you. And the nations, not only Israel, but the whole world, shall come to your light, and kings the brightness of your rising. What a stupendous promise, that despite the utter despair and darkness of the world, God would show favor on the earth out of no stimulation on the part of the peoples, because they are still in darkness. They haven't all of a sudden become like super good or super religious. They don't deserve to be visited, but the grace of God is going to come in the person of light who will give insight to the people, and he brings salvation to them. This is the account of Zacchaeus. Now, Jericho, Jesus is passing through Jericho. I think this is on purpose. There's a parallel between Jericho and the person I'm thinking of now. Who was the person who made Jericho, put Jericho on the map in the Old Testament? Okay, Joshua, you're smarter than I thought, because I thought of the other one. The first famous occupant of Jericho, and she plied her living with the kind of people that Robert Kraft this last week went to go see. Rahab the prostitute, and Rahab is known in her city, and she's in the service, the oldest profession, as they say, and she comes, and by understanding the exploits of God that have filtered down to Jericho, she has become a believer in Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, and they're part of the promised land is beginning in that region of Jericho, and they've sent spies in the land to get a lay of the land, to see what lays ahead of them, that the Lord is going to take care of the giants of the land. But the spies are there, and there's wind of their being there on the part of the Jericho government officials, and they want no part of being invaded by the God of the Israelites. And so they want to find these spies because they want to kill them. They want to thwart the plans on the part of God's people given by the Lord, that he's going to overtake these people. And so they're looking for the spies in the most vigilant way. Somebody end the story. How does Rahab? She lives in the very outskirts of the community. She lives right by the wall, which protects the people on the inside. How is Rahab the harlot a hero?
She hung a sign so that they could understand who she was, and they bypassed her.
We have them, and when the officials came to her house, she talked to them, and this might have been an issue with the new believers class, was it, Steve? About she lied, told them, sure wish I could help you, but the spies didn't come here. I think I got wind of them being way over there, just totally different from. And it says that God took heed of her faith in the Lord in protecting the spies from discovery, and salvation came to her and to her household.
Amen.
Now, when in the family tree of Jesus, Rahab is right there in the family tree, you don't expect that. I had an uncle. His name was Theo Chilo. And Theo Chilo was, in the old-fashioned term, a bum. And he hopped the freight trains across the United States. And he had adventure stories. He's one of our favorite uncles. But he was disreputed in the family because he got involved in stuff that was just colorful but illegal. And just he was just a rogue of a guy. But my Theo Chilo is part of my heritage, is part of the family tree. Well, Jesus had a Theo Chilo, and it was Rahab. Rahab the harlot is there in plain sight. For God is not ashamed to be numbered among sinners. Isn't that great of him? He doesn't mind that his reputation is going to be impugned because of the people that he hangs out with, that he invites into his family.
Amen.
I love that about him. I love that about this story. It has the same component. Because in this Jericho, there's another infamous person. It's well known. He's a tax collector, and he's very rich. That's all the text says. It also says he's small in stature. But Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector. And to be redundant, he was rich. The story is told Only he knew what the tax bill was, and they lived lavish lives because they skimmed off the top. And they had to be Jewish because they knew the people well, but they were turncoats. They would use the knowledge of inside information they would get from living in your community, and they would tell on you. And everything in the world would be taxed. That's how the government was so good in collecting your taxes. So that's Zacchaeus. Here's the account. Well, there's some good introduction stuff here, too, about Jesus has just finished talking in the previous paragraph about how it is so difficult for rich people to be saved. And we can surmise why. Maybe self-sufficiency is why rich people find it hard. Humbling yourself to have somebody else be in control of your life. Jesus doesn't say. But he gives this idiom, this expression that's been debated. Still doesn't know what he really meant. Jesus said it's harder for a rich man to come to God, enter the kingdom of God, than it is for a camel to fit in the eye of a needle. Now, for WMS, that's a boon. They know what a needle is, and they know the little eye of the needle and threading. And I used to do that so sensually when I was younger, and just got with the thing. And not nowadays, it's like, I know, honey, can you thread this needle? And it's just hard to thread a needle. Imagine a camel threading the eye of a needle. Some people think, no, it wasn't about sewing. It was about a gate that was particularly low, and it was called the eye gate. And so the camels, to get through the eye gate, a passageway into another sector of the town, it was very difficult because they would have to get down on their knees. And so being leading your camel through that particular gate of Jerusalem was exceedingly hard. And people, it's a way of saying it's just near impossible for a camel to get through that particular opening in the wall, or it does mean about sewing. Nevertheless, Jesus says, with man it may be impossible, but with God nothing's impossible.
Amen.
Like how is a sinful individual going to come in the presence of God when what's required is moral, absolute perfection? Impossible. It's not going to happen. But it's possible with God. Nothing is ever over, even if the fat lady sings with God. It's not over. This is how grace forgives and how it transforms. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he couldn't, because he was small in stature. And so he ran on ahead, and he climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up, and he said, Zacchaeus. Now, there's not a whole lot of time between Zacchaeus come down, but can you imagine what the crowd must have thought when Jesus notices Zacchaeus? How does he know his name? It's Zacchaeus, and they're thinking, this is going to be so sweet. He's going to call him out, and he's going to just rain judgment of words, and maybe he's going to incinerate him right here in front of us. This is good. Like showed up at a hockey game and a fight breaks out, or a crash at NASCAR. This is what you wait for the bad guys to really, really get it. And like Zacchaeus is really going to get it. He deserves God's judgment. He says, Zacchaeus, come on down, hurry and come on down, for I must stay at your house today. You know what that exemplifies? When you invite somebody into your home and you dine with them. It even has that picture today. It's the reason why if you have a friend and you park your car in front of the bar, you kind of look both ways before you go in. Maybe somebody's going to see you going into the bar. So Jesus is going to sup, going to eat with sinners and this publican. It's not republican. It's publican, which meant tax collector, a no-good guy in cahoots with the government to take your money. So here Jesus, Zacchaeus, come on down, and Zacchaeus is overjoyed. He's a curiosity person. He wants to see Jesus, but there's no commitment beyond that. He just wants to get better acquainted because he's heard about Jesus. And so he says, he came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, I mean, who's the they? It's everybody else. Everybody else. The contrast here is between the joy of Zacchaeus and this line, and everybody else grumbled. So you have Jesus being very happy because he's found Zacchaeus. He's been looking forward to this. And you have Zacchaeus very happy. But everybody else, they grumbled. It doesn't say whether the disciples grumbled, but if I had to throw my weight on a guess, I think they grumbled too. What did they grumble? He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And that should not be happening. And Zacchaeus stood, maybe it's not here. Doesn't he know who he's talking with? But that happened in another account where people think Jesus is ignorant, or else he wouldn't put himself in a situation to be associated with somebody like this. And Zacchaeus stood, and he said to the Lord. Now, there's a passage of time, I think, that happens. Because I think Jesus goes to the home with his disciples, and they have a conversation over the food, and things have gone wonderful. I think the principles about the gospel have been shared, and in response to what Jesus had given to Zacchaeus, by way of instruction and by way of explanation of the gospel of Christ, which is Christ took the initiative in living the life of perfection that God requires, and by faith for the asking, you can gain the credit of all of Jesus' good works and put it into your account. Something you never could accrue, something you could never earn on your own or do on your own, Jesus gives it to you. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold." Why do you think Zacchaeus speaks of this particular issue and has this particular pledge or promise?
His heart had been evil, now it was good. So
yes.
he has to do something about it.
And the focus of his sense of guilt and of wrong is in his monetary life, his cheating manner, his covetousness. And under the law, under the Old Testament, when he says, "Behold, half of my goods I give to the poor, if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold." Does anybody know the requirement under the law, if you defrauded your brother of something, what the penalty was?
Fourfold.
No, it wasn't fourfold. Fourfold is exorbitant. The Bible doesn't ask you to do that. If you defrauded some... You know what? I'm as ignorant as the rest of you. So, but I know when I've looked it up for that specific reason, I think it's only like 20% or something. It's not. I mean, it'll hurt you, but it's not going to bankrupt you by fourfold. Are you kidding? Especially a guy like this. How many people has he defrauded? So this is an exorbitant, over the top repentance of the wrong that he has done. In his mind, it seems unforgivable that he'd be forgiven such a horrible life in which he acknowledges he should be punished for. But he says, "I'm going to try to make it up." Now, here's a very important fact, that it wasn't because Zacchaeus said these words beforehand and then God saved him. It was a result of his changed heart that he talks this way, and it's an outward manifestation of his inward belief in Jesus Christ. So Jesus makes this assumption. And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation is come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham." What a pronouncement. How does this man go from the notorious thief and thug up in a tree to now being numbered among the believing people of the nation of Israel.
Christ saved him.
That's right. Christ saved him. He's the dreg of his community. And now in God's eyes, he's as good and equal with anybody else. That's a miracle. That's a greater miracle than any of the miracles that God has manifested physically, is this miracle of heart. There are many, many different lessons that can be derived. What does this mean? I guess I entitled this, God's Love is Crazy Random. What I mean by that, I guess I'm in a household where expressions, the more current expressions are used. And so particularly when Callie's niece comes by and they carry on conversations and they look at interesting things on their iPhone and then show it around, and they'll be looking at their phone. This is so random, and then it gets passed around to just bizarre things that are happening in the world that happen inexplicably and just like without reason. And I thought, that's a good word. God's love and who he decides to love and the extent of his love is crazy. That's my generation. Man, that's crazy. So I thought I'd relate both to the gray hairs and the youngers. This is crazy random. How in the world can you figure out who God's going to love and where his grace is going to land? If you would have told me that God's crazy love would fall on me, what are the chances of that? If you go to San Diego, there's Barrio Logan. Logan Avenue is the major street going through the barrio of San Diego. It's where, because the land is so cheap, they decided to build a contrast of lifestyle. It starts in the barrio of San Diego, and it goes over to the luxury of Coronado. Coronado was an old naval town, but for the not for the enlisted guys. The enlisted guy would be maybe on that side of the bridge, but the bridge goes over to where the officers live. And those of us that dreamed of sometime making it, you'd go, I want a house in Coronado. I want one overlooking the ocean. And that was the place where we played as teenagers. We go over, and there's a famous wooden structure, probably the biggest luxury structure in the world, Hotel Del Coronado. Movies have been made there. Marilyn Monroe shot Some Like It Hot, one of her last movies, there. And that's where our mom would drop us off there, and then we'd drive our own cars there. And we'd use the Hotel Del, used to until they couldn't get in, to use their bathrooms and just kind of wander and sit on their decks and all sorts of things like that. And always prepared to say, are you a guest here? No, but I'm a guest of. And then I use my best friend's name, and he used my name. I'm a guest of Mario Lodge. Okay, and so that's where I came from. And God's love came to me anyway. It's just utterly amazing. Here's some observation. By the pre-plan of God, this interaction with an easily cast-away sinner matters to Jesus. Those who are considered irretrievably lost to the religiously self-absorbed are the ones Jesus came to save. The last line of Jesus' thing of explaining why he's able to call Zacchaeus a friend of Abraham, a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Wherever Jesus goes, there goes joy. That's what I meant to write. Joy surrounds him, and those who embrace him always do it with great joy. Zacchaeus joyfully received him. When Jesus extends grace to Zacchaeus, everyone, the text says all, grumbles. A.T. Robertson gives the background to the unique word gaguza. The word is an onomatopoetic word. Okay, Sherry said it right. And the word, it means the formation of a word like cuckoo, meow, honk, or boom, which is by imitation of the sound being made or associated with what it's referencing. So people murmuring sounded like to the people that to the writer like that. Gaguzo. So I just thought it doesn't really help you, but I thought that's interesting. And the angels, while everybody else is angry, the angels are at the edge of heaven, peering down in excitement. What a contrast. They can't stand it that a sinner is about to be saved. Zacchaeus initially wanted to see who Jesus was. He now addresses him as Lord. His life and his money is now for use as Jesus wants to use it. Jesus obviously knew the heart of Zacchaeus, but he points to the fruit of his conversion as proof of his inner changed heart. Works follow genuine faith. Zacchaeus was Jewish, but he was lost. He was like a lost coin or a lost sheep, even God's prodigal lost son, which has been part of this gospel, Luke 15. He has come home. He's restored to the family of God, a descendant of faith in the tradition of Father Abraham. Jesus shows himself to be the good shepherd. He leaves the 99 for the one. Zacchaeus now belongs to Jesus. This means that his standing will be defined by his relationship to Jesus, not his own life. Zacchaeus is a child of the Most High God. I love that. My identity is not what I do. My identity is who I belong to. Even still, I'm still a Zacchaeus. I'm still a person of great frailty in regards to my desire to live a good and righteous life. I still don't do it. But I'm a forgiven child of God. It doesn't mean that I'm lax in wanting my moral reformation, but I'm realistic and know that my worthiness to God is who I belong to, not my intrinsic value as a keeper of God's commands. Zacchaeus found salvation in his everyday life. Ordinarily, he would have been required to go to the temple to find God. He was not welcome there, but God came to him. God destroyed the temple. Now, the preaching of the salvation God has made possible in the Son and his Son is as mobile and available as his children are. His followers are each a temple of God, representing the message of God's kingdom. Isn't that wondrous? That you don't have, the gospel says, the Great Commission says that God is going into all the world proclaiming the righteousness of Jesus as the solution to man's sin problem. And that we all have been enjoined to be part of that force that shares that glorious good news. One of the things that I think is besetting for, I'm tempted to say for every single person, is to live down your reputation, live down your lack of worthiness of being recipients of the grace of God. I know for the longest time, I didn't feel, even though I was told that I could join and be part of God's team and he could use me in some way, I always demurred. And I said, who am I to be attempting these things? Others are better qualified than I. Others don't have the past that I do. I have a secret part of my past that if you knew it, you wouldn't be asking me to do stuff. I'm really bad. I've really done some things I've been ashamed of. And no one's ever going to find out about it. Because I got to hide it. Because it just wouldn't be accepted. I'm worse than you ever know. And that kept me down. It's what kept my mother from going to church. She was saved. I'm convinced of that. But she could not forgive herself and feel herself. She knew it intellectually. She didn't know it emotionally. She always felt guilty. I get accused of being arrogant, which may be absolutely true. But part of that arrogance that I would cop to being my sense of identity is that I am totally convinced that I am beloved to God. I really matter to God. And I matter to God whether I was a pastor or whether I was a drunkard. It wouldn't matter. God is not a respecter of persons. And the person that God takes to himself is a person that is going to be showered with his love, acceptance, and his favor. Not there's not consequence to living sinfully as a Christian. I think there is. But my sense of well-being, it's as audacious as believing that every single event of my life, God has orchestrated in order to benefit me. Every single thing is going to work out for my good. That can make you cocky. That can make you resilient and can say, God has something in store for me. I just know it. I know that even the things that are coming that are difficult to bear, that they come from the faithful hand of God. And then it'd be sinful for me to think otherwise. Am I chagrined that somebody hates me? It's God who justifies. So who's making a charge? It isn't that I'm not guilty, but it's God who will render judgment on all these things. And it goes on and on and on about being assured that the most important, the most powerful, the one to whom everybody is answerable, is in love with me. Love transforms. My mother's love did that to me. Sherry's love has done that to me. And God's love has done that to me. And I have lesser loves, of course, that my children, just love has a transformation aspect of you. I'm going to ask your indulgence in this one last illustration. It was one of the lowest points of my life. Unbeknownst to me, I was told that I was coming in for a raise. And this person felt, my supervisor felt, that was the only sure way that he could get me to come to a meeting. And I went to the meeting. There was some opening clatter, and then the person chairing the meeting said, now we all know why we're here. And nobody said anything. So I said, for me to get a raise. And it seemed like a sick joke to them, because he said, hardly. We're here to discuss the terms of your termination. I said, I was told we were coming here by my supervisor in order that I would get a raise because my performance has been so outstanding. Now, I can assure you that's not it. It was one of the most panicked feelings I've ever gotten in my life. I was unprepared. And they could tell I was unprepared. And they said, we're so sorry. Do you want to postpone the meeting? I said, no. Nothing's going to change between then and now about the truth of of the basis of my being terminated. So go ahead. And they went ahead, and there were five different points. And it wasn't so that I was not guilty of 5 things that I would be worthy to be called before a group. It just so happened that these 5 things were just totally the opposite. It'd be like saying, so I heard you lost $500. Well, actually, no. I just came into a $5,000 inheritance. So rather than losing, I've actually gained the money. Oh, and I hear every single one of those things I'd heard them before. So, and they were false when I told them to my supervisor, and they still were false when he was repeating what he knew would have been denied by me anyway. And so one by one, with explanation, at the end of the meeting, the chairman profusely apologized. He said, I'm so sorry. I assumed that, and I should have gone to you first, that what you were accused of wasn't true, and to a man around this circle, except one man who came about 4 years later, who finally he apologized, but everybody else apologized. And I received this email from a guy who did not want me. His name was Rudy. He was a podiatrist or skin doctor, dermatologist. He didn't want me to be devastated by all the things that had been spread. And it wasn't just to this room. It was to other people in the church. So he said, I really don't know what to say, but I think this story tells it best. And here's the story. Max Lucado. When you become a child of God, that changes everything. You're no longer a tax collector who is infamous. You have the security of being a child of God, and it changes you. You should change your guilt because you're not the same person. It's called small wooden people. The Wemmicks were small wooden people. Each of the wooden people was carved by a wood carver named Eli. His workshop sat on a hill overlooking their village. Every Wemmick was different. Some had big noses, others had large eyes. Some were tall and others were short. Some wore hats, others wore coats. But all were made by the same carver, and all lived in the same village. And all day, every day, the Wemmicks did the same thing. They gave each other stickers. Each Wemmick had a box of golden star stickers and a box of gray dot stickers. Up and down the streets all over the city, people could be seen sticking stars or dots on one another. The pretty ones, those with smooth wood and fine paint, always got stars. But if the wood was rough or the paint chipped, the Wemmicks gave dots. The talented ones got stars too. Some could lift big sticks high above their heads or jump over tall boxes. Still others knew big words or could sing very pretty songs. Everybody gave them stars. Some Wemmicks had stars all over them. Every time they got a star, it made them feel so good that they did something else and got another star. Others, though, could do very little. They got dots. Puccinello was one of these. He tried to jump high like the others, but he always fell. And when he fell, the others would gather around and give him dots. Sometimes when he fell, it would scar his wood, so the people would give him more dots. He would try to explain why he fell and say something silly, and the Wemmicks would give him more dots. After a while, he had so many dots that he didn't want to go outside. He was afraid that he would do something dumb, such as forget his hat or step in the water, and then somebody would give him another dot. In fact, he had so many gray dots that some people would come up and give him one without reason. He deserved lots of dots, the wooden people would agree with one another. He's not a very good wooden person. After a while, Puccinello believed them. I am not a good Wemmick, he would say. A few times he went outside. He hung around with other Wemmicks who had lots of dots too. He felt better around them. One day he met a Wemmick who was unlike any he'd ever met before. She had no star, and she had no dots. She was just a wooden person. Her name was Lulia. It wasn't that people didn't try to give her stickers, it's just that the stickers wouldn't stick. Some admired Lulia for not having no dots, and so they'd run up and they'd give her a star, but it would fall off. Some would look down on her for having no stars, and so they'd give her a dot, but it wouldn't stay either. That's the way I want to be, thought Puccinello. I don't want anybody's marks. And so he asked the stickerless Wemmick how she did it. It's easy, Lulia said. Every day, I go see Eli. Eli? Yeah, Eli, the wood carver. I sit in his workshop with him. Why? Why don't you go find out for yourself? Go up the hill, he's there. And with that, the Wemmick with no marks turned and he skipped away. But he won't want to see me, Puccinello cried out. Lulia didn't hear. So Puccinello went home and he sat near a window and he watched the wooden people as they scurried around giving each other dots and stars. It's not right, he murmured to himself. And so he resolved to go see Eli. He walked up the narrow path to the top of the hill and stepped into the big shop. His wooden eyes widened at the size of everything. The stool was as tall as he was. He had to stretch out on tiptoes to see the top of the workbench. And a hammer as long as his arm, Puccinello swallowed hard. I'm not staying here. And he turned to leave. And then he heard his name. Puccinello, is that you? The voice was deep and strong. Puccinello stopped. Puccinello, how good of you to come and see you. Come, let me have a good look at you. And Puccinello turned slowly and looked at the large, bearded craftsman. You know my name? The little Wemmick asked. Of course I do. I made you. Eli stooped down and he picked him up and he set him on the bench. The maker spoke thoughtfully as he inspected the gray circles. Looked like you've been given some bad marks. I didn't mean to, Eli. I really tried really hard. Oh, you don't have to defend yourself to me. I don't care what the other women say. You don't? No, you shouldn't either. Who are they to give you stars or dots? They're women just like you. What they think doesn't matter. All that matters is what I think. And I think you are pretty special. Puccinello laughed. Me special? Why? I can't even walk fast. I can't jump. My paint is peeling. Why do I matter to you? Eli looked at Puccinello, put his hands on those small wooden shoulders, and spoke very slowly. Because you're mine. That's why you matter to me. Puccinello had never had anyone look at him like this, much less his maker. He didn't know what to say. Every day I've been hoping you'd come, Eli explained. I came because I met someone who had no marks. I know. She told me about you. Why don't the stickers stay on her? Because she has decided that what I think is more important than what they think. The stickers only stick if you let them. What? The stickers only stick if they matter to you. The more you trust my love, the less you care about the stickers. I'm not sure I understand. You will, but it'll take some time. You've got a lot of marks. For now, just come see me every day and let me remind you how much I care for you. Eli lifted Puccinello off the bench and set him on the ground. Remember, Eli said as the women walked out the door, you are special because I made you, and I don't make mistakes. Puccinello didn't stop, but in his heart he thought, I think he really means it. And when he did, a dot fell to the ground. I cried when I read that verse for the first time, and I believed it more and more every day. If you belong to the Lord, you are precious. And no matter what you've done in the past, no matter what people say about you, if they say you're a harlot, and even if it's true, it doesn't matter.
Amen.
If they say you're a liar and a cheat and a no-good count, it doesn't matter. Because you're redeemed by the precious blood of the Lamb, and He is crazy about you. And you're going to be in the presence of the Lord Himself. And you're going to be in the presence of people anywhere. Because you belong to God. And He hasn't made a mistake. Father, for the truth of the gospel, it got you in trouble. Because you cared about a little kid growing up in San Diego on the outskirts of town. Nothing notable about his family. The details are pretty ugly. You cared about Rahab. You cared about Zacchaeus. And you cared about so many of us that fit that description. I'm going to do work among the people of the world, but there won't be very many of them that are noble. Not a whole lot of them that have commendable lives. The only requirement is that you're lost. I come to seek and to save those that are lost. Father, we celebrate who have been found, the love that's been unconditional and reached out to, of all people, somebody like me, somebody like so many in this congregation. Help us, Lord, to have the same mission in our life, to seek and to save those that are lost, to tell them about Eli, about the maker of us all. And when he says you are forgiven, you are my child, that changes everything. Help us, Lord, to live in your love and let that love permeate deep into our spirit and our soul, that ours would be a countenance not of rejection, not of hopelessness, but of expectation and of blessing, because that's the kind of Father you are. I pray this on behalf of all those gathered here, this precious flock. In Jesus' name.